All right, so today we're diving into Aleppo, Syria.
Yeah.
You sent over a ton of articles about this surprise offensive.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a lot to keep up with.
It really is. I mean, things are changing so fast, it's hard to even process it all. The situation in Aleppo, I mean, wow, it was supposed to be recovering after the government took back control in 2016, finally starting to rebuild.
Right.
But now, insurgent groups, these guys, especially Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS,
Yeah.
they're pushing further into the city than anyone expected.
It's really concerning for a city that's already been through so much.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Aleppo is Syria's second largest city.
Exactly.
Historically and strategically so important.
Huge.
And it was absolutely devastated by the fighting a few years ago.
Absolutely. To see it plunged back into this level of conflict is just, I don't even know.
Yeah, and the speed of this offensive, it's what's caught everyone off guard, right?
It's unbelievable. These insurgent groups, they launched a coordinated attack Wednesday, and they have been moving through government-held areas like it's nothing.
I was reading about Syrian government forces retreating with almost no resistance.
Oh, yeah.
So what's going on? Like, what factors have contributed to this sudden change?
Well, we have to remember the other conflicts that are going on right now, like in Lebanon and Gaza, the Syrian government's allies, groups like Hezbollah.
Right.
They're really tied up in those fights.
Yeah.
And that's stretching their resources super thin. They can't be everywhere at once.
So are we saying there's this ripple effect?
Oh, absolutely.
Like instability in one place?
Yeah.
Kind of creates an opening for more conflict somewhere else.
That's exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Plus, we can't ignore that 2019 ceasefire agreement, the one brokered by Russia, Turkey, and Iran.
Right.
It was supposed to de-escalate the fighting in Syria,
Yeah.
but then the government started attacking opposition-held areas again.
Undermining that agreement.
Totally. So tensions reignited, and now we have this new wave of violence.
In the articles you sent, they mentioned insurgents using car bombs to get through Aleppo's western outskirts.
Yeah,
That's the first time opposition forces have entered the city since 2016, right?
first time since 2016. It's a huge symbolic victory for them, but it's also a strategic win.
For sure.
They've also taken Saraqueb,
Oh, wow.
which is a strategically vital town south of Aleppo.
And that sits on those highways.
Right, where those highways connect Aleppo to Damascus and the coast.
Taking Sarakep, that's a big deal, right? I mean, you mentioned in your notes that it could be a major turning point.
Huge deal. It cuts off those government supply lines.
Right.
It's like they've got them by the throat now.
So it disrupts the government's ability to...
Everything. Moving troops, getting resources, mounting a counteroffensive.
Wow.
This could shift the entire conflict. Who knows?
And you mentioned that insurgents are using drones.
Oh, yeah. It's not just the old ways anymore.
So they're using drones to target government positions.
Uh-huh. There was even a report about them destroying a helicopter at an airbase.
Really?
Yeah, with a drone.
Wow.
It makes you wonder, where did they get that tech? You know what I mean?
Right. And what does that mean for the future of this conflict?
It's a whole new ballgame now.
Okay, so internationally, we're seeing some pretty different reactions.
Oh, yeah.
Russia seems to be all about maintaining stability,
Mm-hmm.
while Iran's just pointing fingers at the U.S. and Israel.
Yeah, typical.
So how do these differing perspectives make peace even harder to achieve?
Well, Russia's backing the Assad regime, right?
Right.
So for them, this offensive is a direct threat to Syrian sovereignty and their influence.
Yeah.
They're calling for order to be restored, but with everything else going on, who knows what they can actually do?
Yeah.
Then you've got Iran, and they're all like, this is the U.S. and Israel trying to destabilize everything.
All right.
They think it's a plot to capitalize on the mess in Lebanon and Gaza and weaken their influence.
So they see it as just another way to pressure Hezbollah and their allies.
Exactly. They're playing the blame game, rallying support.
So it's like two totally opposite interpretations of the same situation.
Totally opposite. It's what makes these conflicts so hard to understand.
And then there's Turkey,
Oh, Turk.
trying to play both sides.
Walking that tightrope.
Officially supporting a limited offensive while still expressing concern for the humanitarian situation.
They want to have their cake and eat it too, They're trying to protect their interest in northern Syria, which means supporting some opposition groups, but they don't want things to totally blow up, especially with Russia and Iran already involved.
So they're in a tough spot.
Very tough. It's all about security concerns, regional ambitions, and not making anyone too angry.
And meanwhile, the people of Aleppo are stuck in the middle.
It's awful. These articles talk about Thousands of civilians being displaced, aid groups struggling to even get in there.
It just reminds you of the human cost of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. The people of Aleppo have already been through hell, and now they're facing even more violence and displacement.
And we talked about this before. The change in power, it raises all these questions about the future of the whole region.
For sure.
If this offensive keeps succeeding, it can make the opposition even stronger.
Absolutely.
And prolong the Syrian civil war even longer, right?
It's a real possibility. It could inspire other groups to jump in, escalate the whole thing. And then what happens if other regional powers get involved?
Right, like things could get even more unstable.
Exactly.
Right.
And with what's happening in Lebanon and Gaza, it's a powder keg.
So we've talked about the background, the offensive, the international reactions.
A lot to unpack.
But I keep coming back to why now? What made these groups decide to launch this offensive now?
That's the million-dollar question. And to understand that, we need to get into the heads of these groups, especially HTS.
Okay.
They're the ones calling the shots here, so let's dive into their motivations and goals.
That was good.
We need to figure out what they're really after. So HTS, these guys are fascinating.
Yeah, you mentioned they have a really complicated history.
They've had so many transformations over the years. It's like they're constantly reinventing themselves, trying to distance themselves from al-Qaeda.
Right.
But ideologically, they're still a bit of a mystery.
So what are they even fighting for then? Like, what's the end game? What do they want?
Well, it seems like they have a whole bunch of goals, you know? It's not just one thing. Establishing an Islamic emirate in Syria, that's definitely high on their list.
Right.
But they also want to take down the Assad regime.
Of course.
And then there's the whole control of territory and resources thing.
Right, power grab.
Exactly. But the problem is their vision for Syria doesn't exactly line up with what anyone else wants, you know?
Yeah.
Not the other opposition groups, not the international community.
So how can you even talk about peace when everyone wants such different things for Syria?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's the challenge with these multi-layered conflicts. Everyone's got their own motivations, interpretations, goals, and then you throw in the external actors.
Oh, yeah, that adds a whole other layer.
Oh,
You mentioned that earlier, the external actors. Are there any signs that foreign powers are actually supporting these groups?
you know, it's always a bit murky in these situations. There have been accusations, rumors flying around,
Yeah.
people saying that certain regional powers are lending a hand.
Funding weapons, training, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But concrete evidence is hard to come by.
So we can't rule out outside help.
We can't. It's a factor, for sure. The flow of weapons, funding, training, it can make a huge difference in what these groups can do and how they operate.
Okay, so internal motivations, maybe some external influences. It's a mess.
It is.
How does this play into how Russia and Iran are reacting?
Well, for Russia, this offensive is like a slap in the face.
How so?
They've put so much effort into stabilizing Syria, propping up the Assad regime, trying to keep things under control.
Right, both militarily and politically.
Exactly. And now this offensive comes along and totally messes up their narrative of progress and stability.
Which they really need.
Huge blow to their strategic interests in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Makes sense. And what about Iran? It seems like they just blame the U.S. and Israel for everything.
They see it as this grand conspiracy, you know, like the U.S. and Israel are working together to sabotage everything.
Undermine their influence.
Exactly. Destabilize Syria, Lebanon, all the places where they have a foothold.
So from their perspective, this offensive is just another way to squeeze their allies.
Yep, like Hezbollah exploit the chaos in Gaza and Lebanon.
It's just interesting how their view is so different from Russia's.
Night and day. And that's what makes these conflicts so hard to wrap your head around.
It's like everyone's looking at the same picture, but they see something totally different.
Perfect analogy. And then you've got Turkey in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy.
Still walking that tightrope.
They officially back a limited offensive, but they're also worried about the humanitarian crisis,
So they're stuck between their interests in northern Syria.
which involves supporting certain opposition groups,
Right, and not wanting to escalate the whole thing.
especially with Russia and Iran already involved.
It's a delicate balancing act.
For sure, they've got to tread carefully.
You know, it's almost like history repeating itself.
Yeah, how so?
Aleppo was where some of the most brutal fighting happened earlier in the Syrian civil war.
Oh, yeah, the siege of Aleppo?
That went on for years, right?
Years. It was a major turning point, but in a bad way. So much destruction, a humanitarian catastrophe.
And now, here we are again.
Same city, different circumstances.
It makes you think, are there any lessons we can learn from what happened before?
That's a good question. I mean, one thing that really sticks out from the siege is the horrific impact on civilians.
The humanitarian crisis was just devastating.
Absolutely. That's why we have to prioritize the people caught in the crossfire of this new offensive.
Right. We can't let history repeat itself.
We need to make sure aid organizations can get to those in need.
And that everyone involved respects international humanitarian law.
Civilians have to come first, no matter what.
Couldn't agree more.
It's not just about providing aid, though. We have to address the root causes of this conflict, the things that keep fueling this cycle of violence.
Like what?
The political grievances, the sectarian tensions, the fight for resources.
It's a lot to untangle.
It is, but we have to acknowledge the complexities, understand the history, put people first.
It's a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the motivations of the groups involved, how the key players are reacting, the historical parallels.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And we've emphasized the humanitarian crisis, the urgent need to protect civilians.
It's a top priority.
But what I find really interesting is how little we're talking about what everyday Syrians actually want.
That's a great point. We get so caught up in the geopolitics that we forget about the people actually living through this.
Exactly. What are their hopes? What are their fears? What kind of peace do they envision?
Those are the voices that need to be heard.
Absolutely.
They're the ones on the front lines experiencing the true cost of war.
And they're the ones who will ultimately have to live with the consequences.
Exactly. We need to understand their perspectives if we want to find real solutions.
It's like you said, peace building isn't just about negotiations between powerful people.
It's about creating a future where all Syrians can thrive, a future where they feel safe and secure.
And where their voices are heard.
Exactly. That's what true peace building looks like.
I think this is a good place to pause for a second.
For sure.
When we come back, I want to dig into this idea of peace building a little deeper.
It sounds good.
What does it actually look like in a place as complex as Syria?
Yeah, that's the big question.
And what are the real challenges and opportunities for making peace last?
There's a lot to consider.
So we were talking about the people in Syria and what they want for their future.
Yeah, their aspirations for peace.
It's easy to forget about them when you're focused on all the politics and fighting.
It's crucial to remember, though, real peace building, it can't just be about governments and armed groups making deals behind closed doors.
Right.
It has to be about helping communities to heal, rebuild trust, and move forward.
So how do we even begin to approach that in
Yeah.
a place like Syria? I mean, it's so divided.
Well, there's no easy answer.
Right.
But we can look at other countries that have gone through similar conflicts.
Like, what have they done?
One big lesson is that you have to include everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah, you can't build lasting peace if you shut certain groups out.
So it's not just about the government and the rebels sitting down together.
Nope, it's about making sure everyone has a voice.
Like who?
Civil society groups, community leaders, women, young people, different ethnic and religious groups.
All of them.
All of them. Everyone needs to feel like they have a stake in the process and that their concerns are being heard.
Especially in Syria, with all the different groups that have been fighting.
Exactly. Those divisions run deep.
So how do you build trust between people who have been at war for so long?
It takes time. A lot of time. And it often starts at the local level.
Right.
Think about things like dialogue groups,
Okay.
community projects where people from different sides work together, workshops where they can share their experiences and try to understand each other.
Building peace from the bottom up.
Exactly. It might seem small, but these local initiatives can be really powerful.
How so?
They help people connect, break down those barriers, start to see each other as human beings again.
That makes sense. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution for Syria,
Definitely not. It has to be tailored to their unique situation.
taking into account their history.
And most importantly, the needs and aspirations of the Syrian people themselves.
We can't just impose something from the outside.
Exactly. There's no magic formula. You have to be flexible, willing to listen and learn and understand the local context.
Okay, so inclusivity, grassroots initiatives. What else is important for successful peace building?
Accountability is a big one.
What do you mean?
You have to address the things that have happened, the atrocities.
Right.
Hold the people who committed those crimes accountable.
And provide justice for the victims.
Exactly. Without that, it's really hard to move on and build trust.
That's tough, though, isn't it? I mean, in Syria, there's been so much violence.
It is. There are so many different groups involved, so many layers to it.
So how do you even begin to untangle that?
Well, there are mechanisms that can help.
Like what?
Truth commissions, special courts, things like that.
Okay.
They can help acknowledge what happened and provide some closure for victims.
But those have to be done really carefully, right?
Absolutely. Fairness and impartiality are crucial.
What about the international community? Can they help with peace building in Syria?
They can, but they have to be careful. They can't just come in and dictate what should happen.
Right.
Their role should be more about support,
Okay.
providing expertise, financial assistance, creating an environment that encourages peace.
But ultimately, the solutions have to come from within Syria.
Exactly. Has to be driven
Huh.
by the Syrian people.
It sounds like a long road ahead.
It is, and there are no guarantees.
Even with all the right pieces in place, peace might not happen.
That's true. Peace building is messy. It's not a straight line. There will be setbacks, challenges, moments where it feels like it's all falling apart.
Right.
But we can't forget about the people in Syria who are working for peace.
The ones who haven't given up hope.
Exactly. They're out there working every day to build a better future.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is. It
Thank
shows
you.
the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, the belief that even in the darkest times, things can change.
This has been a tough conversation.
Yeah.
But important. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of this conflict.
It's a lot to process.
But we can't forget about the human cost
Never.
and the fact that there is still hope.
There's always hope. And as you continue to follow this story, remember to look beyond the headlines.
Don't just skim the surface.
Dig deeper. Find those stories of resilience and courage, and think about the human impact of everything that happens.
That's a good reminder. This has been a really heavy but necessary deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep